Have you seen those TikTok videos about the landlord special? Random guy who's renting an apartment and he just paints over outlets and everything. The way that I think people develop that reputation is because, they're trying to save money, being cheap, right? And there's this whole stigma around landlords, real estate investors, of always just thinking about the money, how to save money. And one of the biggest problems I think Canadian real estate investors have is that they don't understand how being cheap is actually more expensive.
Oh, it always costs us a lot more when we're trying to be cheap.
I think it's almost like a rite of passage, something that you have to go through, the motions you have to go through in order to really understand. You know how people used to say the first person you should hire is an accountant? And I used to think to myself, how the hell am I supposed to afford an accountant? To account what? I have no money. What am I going to account for? But then as soon as I made money, it went by so quick because I didn't have an accountant. So I didn't know how to control it.
And also even the proper bookkeeper, right? We try to do everything by ourselves. And every time that we do that, it's like we find ourselves in a position where we're actually end up bleeding more money. This happens literally on a daily basis, right? People are finding the family members, their friends who don't specialize in investment, and they use their friends and family to actually find investment properties. And what end up happening is that there's just so many different clauses that they're not aware of, and they got themselves into a situation where it end up costing them tens of thousands of dollars.
Exactly. So I think that's going to be a good topic of conversation for today. I think we should talk about Canadian real estate investors are sometimes cheap in a way that becomes expensive. So let's maybe go through the timelines of when people start to look for investment properties, buy investment properties, to operating them, to selling them, through the whole motion of how being cheap ends up costing them money. So let's start off with buying a property.
So the very first mistake that most people made is that they use the wrong realtors to buy their investment properties. And then they maybe find just a regular mortgage agents who's not specializing in the investment to qualify for the mortgage. So they're not aware of a lot of terms and conditions in terms of how much they need to actually pay out for the lender's fee, or even prepayment, which is a penalty discharge when they need to actually end the mortgage early.
And oftentimes, because they're leveraging a relationship, they sometimes say, okay, well, can you give me a break on the commission? Or can you give me a break on maybe some of the lender fees if they're using a friend who does mortgages?
Pretty much the majority of the reason why they choose their friends over the professionals, right?
Yeah.
Because they're trying to save a bit of a cost.
Now, there are instances, I think, where your realtor friend is going to be really good, for example, or there will be instances where one of your other buddies is actually able to connect you in an honest way to the best resource because they have maybe an inside hookup to some of the deal. And I think that's what people sometimes hope. But more often than not, the real estate agent that you're leveraging is probably just as much leveraging his relationship or her relationship with you as you are with them. So it's kind of like the blind leading the blind. The consumer doesn't know what they're doing, and the realtor isn't that great either, and they're both kind of helping each other out, and neither of them know what they're doing.
Yeah, think about it. The fact that they're willing to reduce their compensation, their pay to do something for you is usually because they're so new, or they don't value their expertise enough.
That actually brings up a very good point. And on the note of construction, when I used to do construction work, is I had a rule, and then my father taught me this, is that if I'm going to do a favor for any friend, you either do it for full price or you do it for free. Never do it for something in between. Because at the point where they paid for it, people don't know how to appreciate the discount. And if you do it for full price, chances are you can afford to be as professional as you need to be. But the minute you give a discount, you compromise your service, and you can't be as professional.
I like that a lot, because here's the thing: being cheap on the service, you're pretty much asking for discount service, which usually involves you to do a bit of coordination in between, because now you need to compensate for that discount service.
Yeah.
And what end up happening is that you end up being the assistant for, let's say, the contractor, right?
Yeah.
Picking up supplies, selecting the design, right? If the certain things doesn't line up with the timeline, now you're responsible for it. So at the end of the day, is it actually worth it? I don't know.
That's one of the first places where people mess up, is with the realtor. What's the next step? So somebody goes and finds a house, and let's say he needs a little bit of some repairs. People will often consult with a contractor, and who do people go? Their uncle, their brother, their cousin, somebody who's in the family, and says, yeah, no, I'm going to come on weekends and help fix this place up for you.
Oh, that
and then
takes
what
up
happens?
so much more time.
Exactly. Then you end up sitting with the property unfinished for months. Sometimes, I've seen people wait a year in order to get things done. And then even when it's move-in ready, it's kind of like it's okay. So when you leverage family because they're going to be able to save you costs on it, they're going to give you headaches in other areas.
Yeah, by the way, I want to put some perspective in here, because we obviously went through this process before, right, when we first started. But here's the thing: some people might say, hey, I actually end up saving about 20,000, even though the work took 10 more months, right? But I still managed to save 20,000. Imagine how much mortgage you can actually save on if you can just get the work done within the very first month after you acquire the project.
Yeah.
You end up waiting for 10 months. That's 10 months of a carrying cost that you need to pay out.
Yeah.
You're not saving on the money.
What you're talking about is you're talking about opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is something that is very difficult for people to understand because it is not actually there. Kind of theoretical. It's opportunity, right? It's opportunity that was never realized, and people don't know how to factor that in. For example, I know of a couple people, they have unfinished basement units partially renovated that they want to do themselves because they don't want to pay a contractor $15,000, $20,000 to finish it and take it to a point where it can be rented. They end up taking over a year. Now, if that basement unit could have been rented out for $1,500, you multiply that by 12, that's going to be about, $18,000 or whatever it is. You might as well have paid the contractor to finish it.
Yeah.
You would have had that rental income, and that rental income is valuable when it comes to the bank seeing how much money you're generating so you can buy your next property. So
Exactly,
it
refi.
costs you, right? So that covers construction. What's another way? Let's think of something that's more personal to us. What is one of the ways we were cheap that really hurt us?
For a lot of landlords, maybe when there's a tenancy turnover, you don't want to pay for the cleaner, so you go in there, or you try to squeeze the cleaner a little bit. You don't want to be paying $25 an hour. You try to get someone, high school students, to do it for like $15 an hour.
Yeah.
What end up happening is that now you have to be supervising the kids, right?
Yeah.
And what happens if you pay someone and in the midway they left, or they just didn't do the job up to your standard?
Yeah.
Now you end up having to drag your wife, your family members back into the rental units and do the cleaning yourself, right? That happens very often, I think.
I know. And then you start getting into this mentality, and it's not a true mentality. You see, some people have that idea now of, look, I hired somebody, they didn't do a great job, and I messed it up. I still have to go there and do it. So I have to do everything myself. And then you end up in that cycle. If I don't do it myself, then it's never going to get done right. But it's not that. It's that you literally get what you pay for. It's an adage that stands true to time. You get what you pay for, and when you squeeze people or people offer you a cheaper service, you're getting exactly that, a cheaper service.
Exactly.
People need to be careful with that. And I know that we found ourselves, especially early on, doing things that we found people were dropping the ball on. Like, how many times did we move fridges?
Oh my God, that's crazy.
Yeah. We moved fridges, we moved appliances, we found ourselves cleaning. And honestly, if you find yourself doing that, I definitely think it was a very humbling experience,
It's a terrible experience. That's why it is.
It's a terribly humbling experience.
Yeah, no, but here's the thing though, like when we're trying to be cheap or when we're trying to save on some costs, we just end up having to compensate a lot of not just the physical work that we need to do, it's also the mental energy. The amount of aggravation that we went through is crazy. Hiring the wrong people. So that's why that we end up believing in just hiring the right people, pay them right, and these people will take care of us and take care of our time.
Here's one of the takeaways I feel for anybody who is consuming a service like this, or if they are giving a service like this. When you charge a cheap service, one of the things I found most insulting that a cleaner told me was, listen, I only charged you $200. What do you expect? He is right, but I'm right also. In that I hired you to clean the place. I didn't ask him for a discount. He quoted me $200, and it was kind of vague as to what he was doing. I should have taken some time to evaluate it more, saying, what do you expect? Based off of the price. Your understanding and their understanding of what that price entails is going to be very different and is only going to prove to sour the relationship if you lack that clarity and expectation. That's why the 3-quote system is very important, is because if you understand the average of what things should cost, average quality, then you have a good idea of what to expect. And then you can set that expectation from the start.
Understand the market rate. Don't squeeze too hard on that.
Let's qualify a little bit the difference between saving money by doing things yourself and saving money by hiring somebody cheaper. Because, like, for example, honestly, unless you have something that is way more valuable to do, if you have a skill set, there's nothing wrong with doing it yourself to save that money. As long as you don't have anything else that you should be doing,
exactly.
right?
Because that's the opportunity cost, right? If you can earn like $40 somewhere else, then of course you focus on that and then you pay people an appropriate amount to handle that job so you don't have to actually pay attention to or be distracted from your job.
Yeah.
Right? But if this specific job pays you $100 an hour, of course you do it.
And that's where you have to make a decision, but people get carried away with it. I know contractors, people who are doing house flips, get carried away with that the most. Everything that needs to be done in the house, they can do themselves. When I look at a house, everything that needs to be done there, I could do it. I could do the ductwork, I could do the steel structure, I could do the supporting beams, I could do the stairs, right? But if I do everything, how much am I going to save? It's not that I'm saving, I am now giving myself a job. That's the problem with a DIY kind of mentality, right? Where it's almost like an illness and it starts taking you away from being a real estate investor.
Yeah, also the biggest issue is that contractors sometimes get emotionally attached to the property, or even like they started doing things that they prefer for their own use, and they started getting carried away from the big picture.
Yes.
Right, so that's number one. And second thing is that when contractors budgeting the work, they don't calculate the carrying cost, TMI, and obviously the mortgage payment. That's where people start losing money.
Which brings us, I think, to the next way that you can potentially lose money, which is accounting. How are some ways that we lost money due to bad accounting or poor accounting practices?
Yeah, so there's a saying that if you don't know your accounting, if you don't know the finance of your company, you don't run a business, right? So we
Yeah.
certainly didn't or wasn't running a successful business in the first 2 years.
No.
Right? We're not tracking we're so busy at making money, but we had no idea how to keep the money. I remember when we were doing the audit with our accountant, there was a tons of double charges from a software, right? The software that we didn't end up using, but
Yeah.
we didn't actually cancel it
Yeah.
2 years after. And also the P&L, the projection, we were not paying attention to any of that. And that's why I remember at the time we were working pretty hard, we're drawing some pretty decent income. We're always wondering how come the saving doesn't go up.
One of the things I feel happens often, especially when people are doing house flips, I know that we can go back to the example because people often, whether you're house flipping or you're a landlord, people will often pay for some kind of renovations. And what contractors or smaller handymen will do is they'll slip in little charges into their receipts. Like maybe they went to buy supplies, they gave you the supply receipt. They put some tools in there that they bought. They put some extra supplies for other job sites. And these are things where if you have somebody looking and spot checking, asking questions, it's the spot check and the asking questions that helps to keep your team and also your books clean.
Yeah, don't test the human nature because a lot of times if people know that they're not being monitored, it's very easy for them to say, hey, why don't I just throw in a few things and hopefully nobody finds out.
Exactly. So you give people an inch, they take a mile. And this is where if they know simply that you have somebody checking the books, checking the receipts, people are less likely to try anything shifty.
And the last thing I wanted to kind of mention about the accounting side is the inventory management. How much shit that we actually bought that we put into our storage and we never touch it afterwards.
This is all DIY illness. This is all contractor illness. I think that's largely my fault because I go and I see things on sale. I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy this as a good deal. We're going to use it at some point. This will be useful some days. That's why I went and I bought like 140 faucets, right? When they were all on clearance because I'm just like, this is such a great deal. But who's keeping track of that?
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew, right?
When we hire a technician, right, or when we hire a project manager, sometimes they do that too because like they were like, oh, we can actually save quite a bit of money for the next few jobs. And then design change and whatever, right? I remember at some point we had so much like flooring, like vinyl flooring that we stored. There was still a few boxes over there and we can't actually use it because now the design has changed. Those become a waste.
Yeah, it becomes troublesome. So where you try to end up saving money because it's on sale and you try to inventory, now you need to pay somebody to inventory everything that you've inventoried and it just becomes a little bit more costly. These are all very good examples. I know not everybody has inventory, not everybody has storage, but people end up spending money. And the problem I think that we had, that a lot of people can relate to, is it's actually so easy to spend money. It's hard to make it and save it. Making and saving money is actually harder. Like people go and they buy the house. That was easy. People go and they spend money on the renovations. That was easy. Now try borrowing your property, getting the mortgage for your property. Now try selling your property and see if it all works out, right? So when it comes to making that money back, it becomes challenging. And so I think that people need to have control of those numbers in order to reduce those challenges.
I agree with you.
Where does this come full circle? People move into the selling portion. And now people have to decide, should I stage the home? Should I paint the house before selling it? Should I sell it with the tenants or should I fix it, right? And this is where people start to think, oh, is it worth it? Is it not? And this is where people try to save. In the selling or the exiting process, how do people save money that costs them?
Try not to paint, try not to stage, and those are obviously the wrong thing to do because you're trying to make a good impression in the very beginning, right? That's why we always make sure that the property is cleaned, right? It's staged, and even sometimes we do some landscaping at the front of the house because then it feels welcomed.
Do you think people try to save on that which they don't value as much, or do they try to save on what they value more?
Most people put their personal feelings towards that, right? And number one is that, hey, pay money hurts. Second thing is that sometimes if they also don't care about that kind of stuff, they won't value the same way as the consumer would value. But one other thing I kind of want to mention is that sellers are usually worse than the buyer in terms of the expectation. Buyer thinks that the property is not worth that much. Seller is worse. They always overvalue their property.
Yeah.
When it's 800,000, they think it's 950. When it's like 1.5, they think it's 2.5 mil.
So they have these opposing forces and they're pulling themselves in the opposite direction. But in terms of like where they actually try to save money, what I noticed is I feel that people try to save money on a lot of the things that they feel is technically easy and it costs a lot of money and they sometimes underestimate just how much work it is. For example, painting. I was helping some family paint a property a while ago now, right? And they went in there with all their cousins, with their uncles and whoever, and they said, yeah, we're all gonna have a painting party. It sounds great, but don't have your expectations too high. But not realizing that you did all this work. And painting is theoretically not that difficult. But it's like, would you paint your car? The paint color is what people see. And that's the finish work. It almost doesn't make sense to not hire a professional to do the painting work. And same thing with staging. People think, how hard is it to stage a house? That sounds like fun. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to buy a bunch of furniture and stage my house. And you and I know, because we actually looked into it, it's hard work.
Yeah, you gotta like assemble all the furniture. It's not just a design. Like picking the design, I think is one thing, right?
Yeah.
But doing the actual work and moving the furniture, disassemble, assemble, all that stuff is pretty difficult. And what happens if you have a different color theme?
There's a lot of things that go into it, and people try to save money by doing some of those things themselves, and then they don't realize exactly how hard it is to do it up to that standard that the professionals are doing it. I think this covers already a lot of things that people like to save money on, where it ends up costing them more in the end because they don't see the value. Staging your home obviously adds value to your property, and it reduces the requirement for the consumer, the buyer, to think about how they're going to use it. On top of that, it hides imperfections.
So as a real estate investor, everybody that's on the power team, on the list of your power team, you shouldn't chip on any of those.